Hello, I'm Zeta Tomlin from the Research Council for Complementary Medicine, and I'm here today with Jennefer D'Aubyn, who won the poster presentation at our conference this year. Hello, Jennefer.
Hello, Zeta.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the research that you won this prize for.
Yes, so I did a systematic quantitative literature review of what nutritional interventions have been investigated for long COVID.
Gosh, that is interesting and very, very topical because
Mhm.
there's so much now looking at how do we deal with this long COVID, something new, something we didn't know about before. I think maybe a bit like post-viral fatigue syndrome, but maybe you found some correlations there. I don't know. So what made you think of doing this?
I thought about doing this because I also work with people with long COVID in my other day job. So I'm
Right.
also a psychotherapist in an NHS service. So I was very interested in the variety of potentially helpful interventions. So whilst it is primarily a psychological therapy service, we have some other expertise in the service: a psychiatrist, a pharmacist, sorry, and a neuropsychologist. So yeah, I think that this is the sort of thing that long-term health conditions. It's such a burden to individuals. It's such a burden to society that
Yeah.
it's not just one magic bullet, kind of intervention. It's going to be a bit more like accumulative gains of small gains.
That sounds really interesting. It sounds like you've got a really good team there as well, looking at
Mm.
it in different ways. And I think we also know there isn't a one size fits all approach to any health condition, whether psychological or physical or a combination of the two. So to be looking at it in that diverse way seems really interesting. So what were the findings? What did you find?
So what I found was that there's been a really wide breadth of interventions studied. So quite one might imagine a little bit of a scattergun approach,
Right.
and inspired by all the different kind of theories about what long COVID might be about, what the mechanisms of long COVID might be. Although I didn't have the space or time to investigate that specifically.
It's a
That's a question
huge subject,
out
isn't
of
it? Yeah,
yeah out of kind of, you answer one question, you get six more. So that's sort of one of the
yeah,
six more questions. But
yeah,
what I did find was that there were some themes. Whilst kind of there were a handful of papers, so I think I found about 43 papers that used a nutritional intervention,
yeah,
sometimes alongside other interventions as well. So rarely is nutrition used exclusively as an
yeah,
intervention. It's
yeah,
often an adjunct to.
yeah.
Um, and there were a handful where they looked at diet, but most of the papers, so there were 37 papers that implemented supplements. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where the focus seems to be,
Right. Yeah.
and looking particularly at, when it comes to micronutrients, protein and fatty acids.
Right.
Um, there's quite a few papers. There was 19 papers looking at 17 different multi-component supplements. So there's sort
Gosh.
of a number of teams out there pulling on different nutritional kind of nutritional micronutrients and macronutrients to create something that might be specifically helpful for long COVID. But there's 17 of them and 19 papers I found. So we can see just how broad we're looking at the
Yeah.
moment. There's not a whole lot of depth just
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
In terms of micronutrients, B vitamins, when it comes to the energy and fatigue side of things, you can imagine we're quite high up there, as were vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A. And key minerals that stood out were magnesium, zinc, iron, and selenium. And
Right.
then some papers also looked at some compounds, so coenzyme Q10, carnitine, malic acid. A couple of plant extracts sort of bubbled up to the fore. One of them being ginseng, and polyphenols, luteolin, quercetin. A couple of papers looked at probiotics, and I think there were a couple that also looked at enzymes. So really covering the whole
Wow.
breadth, really, of
That
what
is a
nutrition we
huge
could
breadth,
do.
isn't there? but it's fascinating that people that, that there's just this desperate need to find what is going to help people get
Yeah.
back get back their full strength, obviously get back to work, get their life back.
Yeah.
And there are other areas where similar things have happened before, but
Mhm.
actually perhaps this is something we should be looking at recovery for all illness, long-term illness, or how do we support people nutritionally in that
Mhm.
way?
Yeah.
So maybe that this is the beginning of looking at things in a new way, which
I
is
think it's definitely
yeah,
stimulated that conversation, and the start of the research certainly looked at the chronic fatigue syndrome and ME and those
yeah,
other, like you mentioned, post-viral fatigue, post-viral syndrome, so things that are very similar. And it perhaps there's a conversation, although it can be quite challenging, that I think it is a worthwhile conversation to think about. Maybe there are some similar mechanisms that would be helpful to have more under an umbrella term, but also it's very important that we don't minimize or suggest that post-COVID syndrome doesn't exist. I think that's
yeah.
something that the people living with that, because it is such a
Oh,
hidden disability,
yeah,
it's so difficult. There's so much self-championing having to be done to say, no, this is how my body functions now,
yes,
and that's
yeah,
different to yours, even though outwardly I look very similar. So getting that kind of acceptance is so very, very important, which I think it's important, why it's important for the research to really specifically state what it's looking at, until we know for certain that they're either specific or very different mechanisms underlying the symptoms.
yes. I think there's quite a range of symptoms, isn't there? So it makes
Yeah,
it very difficult. Again, we come back to one size fits all that just doesn't work like
absolutely.
um, which makes research a bit more difficult, doesn't it? Because,
Yes.
one person might need more of one thing and someone else might need more of something else. So yeah, and
Yeah, that was
such a
really,
new area.
really relevant in this, in doing this, the systematic review approach, because how do I define long COVID, and
Yes,
deciding to
yeah,
go with long COVID rather than post-COVID syndrome. There's kind of this difficulty has a number of different names, and long COVID is the name that what the people living with it came up with.
yes,
So
yeah,
really
yeah.
wanting it to resonate with that community, because that's the community we're trying to support.
Yes, absolutely. I remember when I first heard about it, I thought, gosh, is this post-viral fatigue or ME in another, just under another
Yeah,
name, or is it something unique and of itself? And I guess perhaps we don't even know that necessarily yet.
I don't think we
Um,
do.
but very exciting research, and thank you for sharing it with us today. Lots of food for thought there. Thank
For
you.
certain. Thank you.